Join me as I explore some of the creepiest and most abandoned bathrooms out there. Can I uncover the secrets hidden within? Abandoned bathrooms. There's something inherently unsettling about them. Don't you think? It's as if the very fabric of our daily routines, where we expect to find cleanliness and sanitation, has been turned upside down. These forgotten spaces seem to whisper secrets, taunting our imagination with the unknown, and it's precisely this air of mystery that draws us in, making us wonder what darker tales they might tell. You see, abandoned spaces, in general, have a profound psychological impact on people. They evoke feelings of unease, discomfort, and even fear. It's not just the eerie atmosphere or the sense of decay, but the underlying realization that these spaces were once thriving, full of life, and are now nothing more than a shadow of their former selves. And bathrooms, in particular, tap into our deep-seated anxieties about hygiene, cleanliness, and the unseen. The human psyche is wired to respond to patterns and continuity, and abandoned bathrooms disrupt that sense of normalcy. They're a reminder that even the most mundane aspects of our lives can be reduced to rubble, leaving behind an unsettling sense of desolation. No wonder we're drawn to these spaces, morbidly fascinated by the secrets they might hold. Our innate curiosity drives us to explore, to uncover the stories hidden within the crumbling walls, the rusted pipes, and the stagnant air. And it's this curiosity that has led me to some of the most fascinating, yet terrifying, abandoned bathrooms out there. Let's start with the infamous Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. This abandoned asylum was notorious for its brutal treatment of patients, and the bathrooms, in particular, are said to be haunted by the restless spirits of former inmates. The walls are still adorned with the original tiles, a stark reminder of the horrific events that took place here. Many urban explorers have reported strange occurrences, from disembodied voices to unexplained noises, when venturing into these very bathrooms. Next up is the abandoned Hrongens Resort in Oklahoma. This once luxurious getaway was a favorite among the rich and famous, but its popularity was short-lived. As the years went by, the resort fell into disrepair, leaving behind a labyrinth of decaying corridors and, of course, bathrooms. The most unsettling aspect of this location is the sheer scale of abandonment. It's as if time stood still, preserving the remnants of a bygone era. Then there's the Centralia, Pennsylvania, case, a town that was literally abandoned to a coal seam fire that's been raging since the 1960s. The bathrooms in this ghost town are a testament to the devastating effects of environmental disaster. They stand as a haunting reminder of a community that was forced to flee, leaving behind a trail of devastation. But the most shocking discovery I've come across is the case of the Ohio State Reformatory. This former prison was notorious for its brutal conditions, and the bathrooms, in particular, are said to be haunted by the malevolent spirit of a former inmate. What's truly chilling is the discovery of a hidden room within the bathroom walls, a secret space that was allegedly used for satanic rituals. It's a dark, sinister revelation that sends shivers down the spine. As we've seen, abandoned bathrooms hold a wealth of secrets, from the supernatural to the deeply disturbing. These forgotten spaces tap into our deepest fears, forcing us to confront the darker aspects of human nature. And yet, it's precisely this morbid curiosity that draws us in, compelling us to explore, to uncover, and to share these creepy secrets with the world. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the heart of abandoned bathrooms. If you've got a creepy bathroom story of your own, share it with me in the comments below. And if you're ready for more, be sure to check out my next video on haunted locations. Part 1. The First Descent. I first stumbled upon the bathroom by accident. It was tucked away in the farthest corner of an abandoned school, shrouded in dust and darkness. I'd been exploring the place alone, drawn to it by some primal urge to confront whatever eerie mysteries the building harbored. The school's long hallways and empty classrooms held the typical decay and abandonment, but this bathroom felt different. There was something distinctly unsettling about it, something that made the air feel colder and my heart beat quicker. The entrance had been mostly hidden, camouflaged by debris and a forgotten stack of metal chairs that likely hadn't been touched in years. A single, flickering light bulb hung above the door, barely illuminating the cracked tiles and peeling paint. The air was thick with the stench of mildew, but something about the smell was wrong. It had an acrid, almost metallic edge that lingered uncomfortably in my nose. I pushed open the door, feeling the weight of it, as if years of grime were trying to keep it shut. The door creaked and groaned, louder than it should have in the stillness. When I stepped inside, I immediately noticed how unnatural the silence was, how it pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. The bathroom was expansive, lined with rusty sinks and cracked mirrors that reflected the light in strange, distorted angles. The fluorescent tubes overhead hummed softly, some flickering, casting eerie shadows that seemed to pulse with life. Stalls lined one wall, each one slightly ajar, revealing only darkness within. The grime and decay here were severe, the kind that didn't just happen over time. It looked deliberate, as if someone had allowed this space to rot on purpose. I walked further in, the crunch of broken tiles underfoot echoing as I moved. I ran my fingers along one of the sinks, feeling the rough, rusted edges and the slimy coating of mold. It felt as if I was disturbing something ancient and malignant that had been lying dormant for years. And then I saw at the first sign that this bathroom was different from any other abandoned space I'd explored. Scribbled across the cracked mirror above the larger sink, in what looked disturbingly like dried blood, was a message: "They watch you." I froze, feeling a prickling sensation crawl up my spine. Who were they? And why were they watching? Part 2. Echoes in the dark. I stood, transfixed, by the ominous message smeared across the mirror. The letters were thick and jagged, as if whoever had written them had been in a hurry or panicked. It was unsettling enough to make my stomach twist, but my curiosity was stronger. I took a step closer to the mirror, and that's when I noticed the second detail. Faint fingerprints, small and smeared, trailing down from the corners, as though someone or something had pressed against the glass. I leaned in, my breath fogging the mirror, and something peculiar caught my eye. Reflected in the fractured glass, beyond my own face, I thought I could see movement in one of the stalls at the far end. It was subtle, just a shifting of shadows, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. My eyes darted to the real stall, but everything was still. Trying to steady my nerves, I took a cautious step back, feeling the prickling sensation of being watched intensify. I was alone, yet there was an unmistakable tension in the air, as if the bathroom itself were holding its breath, waiting. I turned my attention to the stalls, which stood in a row like silent sentinels. I counted them 5 in total, each door cracked open just enough to reveal shadows thick enough to swallow the dim light. I inched toward the first stall, my pulse racing, fingers trembling as I reached out and nudged the door open. It creaked and revealed nothing, just a broken toilet covered in rust stains and cobwebs. I moved to the second stall, another empty space, broken porcelain, shattered tiles. But then, as I reached the third, a low, barely audible sound drifted through the room. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers gently drumming on a hard surface. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It echoed, bouncing off the tiles, creating an uneasy, omnipresent feeling. The tapping grew louder, and I realized, with a sinking dread, that it was coming from one of the stalls down the line. The fourth one. I hesitated, the rational part of my brain screaming at me to leave, to abandon this creepy place and never look back. But something else urged me forward, a dark curiosity I couldn't shake. I took a step toward the fourth stall, feeling the air grow colder with every inch. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was inside could sense my approach. When I reached the stall door, I held my breath and pushed it open. It swung slowly, painfully, creaking like a dying thing. And inside, on the wall, just above the toilet, was another message: "You're next." Before I could react, I heard the fifth stall door slam shut with a force that rattled the mirrors on the opposite wall. The sound reverberated through the empty room, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. Part 3. Whispers from within. The silence hung heavy, thick and stifling, as if the room itself were holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. My heart hammered in my chest, and every instinct told me to turn and bolt. But I was frozen, locked in place by a strange mix of terror and fascination. There was something alive in this room, something malevolent, and it wanted me to know it was there. I backed away from the stalls, keeping my eyes on the fifth one, which now stood closed. The door was slightly ajar, not enough to see inside, but just enough to give the impression that someone or something could be lurking within, waiting for me to come closer. As I stepped backward, my heel struck something small and hard, and I looked down to see an old, rusted key on the grimy tiles. It looked ancient, covered in a thick layer of grime that seemed almost glued on, as though it had been lying there for decades. I picked it up, feeling its cold weight in my palm. Somehow, it seemed out of place, as though it belonged to a time long before this school had ever been built. And then, just as my fingers closed around the key, a voice whispered from behind me, "Don't go." The voice was soft, barely more than a breath, but it was enough to send chills coursing down my spine. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the cracked tiles, the broken sinks, and my own reflection in the smeared, filthy mirrors. My eyes darted back to the stalls, half expecting to see something emerging from the shadows. But the stalls remained silent, as if mocking my fear. The voice came again, closer this time, as if someone were standing right next to me, their breath brushing against my ear. "Don't go in there." A surge of panic rose in my throat, and I staggered backward, feeling my pulse racing as I stumbled over the scattered debris on the floor. I clutched the key tightly in my hand, the rough edges biting into my skin, grounding me. I forced myself to take a deep breath, to steady my nerves. I wasn't going to be scared off by some disembodied voice. With a sense of defiance I didn't fully feel, I stepped toward the fifth stall, my eyes never leaving that half-open door. I could feel something watching me, its gaze heavy and oppressive, pressing down on me like a physical weight. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched the cold metal of the stall door. It swung open with a loud creak, revealing nothing, just another abandoned, rust-covered toilet. I let out a shaky breath, half relieved, half disappointed. But as I turned to leave, something on the floor caught my eye, a folded piece of paper, damp and stained, lying just under the edge of the toilet. I bent down and picked it up, unfolding it carefully. The paper was yellowed and brittle, as if it had been left here years ago. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. In cramped, hurried handwriting, it read, "Once you're seen, you can't leave. They'll keep you. They always do." A shiver ran through me as I read the words, and I suddenly felt the overwhelming urge to leave. But as I stood up, I heard something I hadn't noticed before, a faint, rhythmic dripping sound. My eyes followed the sound, and I saw that a small, dark puddle was forming under the last stall door. The liquid was thick, almost black, and it spread slowly across the grimy tiles, inching closer to my feet. I backed away, heart pounding, as the dripping grew louder, heavier, until it echoed through the room, filling the silence with a steady, relentless beat. And then, as I watched in horror, a shadow began to move beneath the stall door. Part 4. The keeper of the stall. The shadow slithered beneath the stall door, dark and viscous, spreading like a pool of ink across the floor. It writhed and pulsed, moving with a life of its own, inching closer as though tasting the air around it. My entire body locked up, refusing to move as the puddle expanded, its edges creeping toward my shoes. The fluorescent lights above flickered violently, casting distorted shadows that stretched and twisted across the walls. In the brief flashes of darkness, I swore I saw faces reflected in the mirrors, faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. But every time the lights came back on, they vanished, leaving only the grime-smeared glass. The shadow was mere inches away from my feet when it halted, quivering as if sensing my fear. My breath caught, and the room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening until it felt like I was breathing through a wet cloth. And then, as if on cue, the whisper returned, this time louder, more insistent. They never leave. The voice was different now, layered, as if a dozen voices were speaking in unison, each with a tone of despair. I stumbled backward, clutching the rusted key so tightly it cut into my palm. The pain grounded me, gave me just enough strength to tear my gaze from the shadow creeping across the tiles. I turned, ready to flee, but as I reached the door, it wouldn't budge. I yanked on the handle, feeling panic clawing at my chest as the door remained stubbornly closed. It was as if some unseen force was holding it shut, keeping me trapped in this decaying, oppressive room. The fluorescent lights flickered again, and I glanced over my shoulder, my heart pounding. The shadow had receded, pulling itself back under the stall, but something else was moving in the mirror. I turned slowly to face it, dread pulling in my stomach. Reflected in the mirror, standing just behind me, was the silhouette of a figure tall, thin shape draped in shadows, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It stood there, motionless, watching me with hollow, empty eyes. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. I couldn't move, couldn't look away, as the figure lifted one hand and pointed, slowly, deliberately, at the fifth stall. No, I whispered, shaking my head, but the figure only tilted its head further, as if mocking my fear. The shadowy hand moved in a beckoning gesture, commanding me to return to the stall. My legs felt like lead, my mind screaming at me to resist, to run, but my body seemed to have a will of its own. I found myself moving toward the fifth stall, each step slow and mechanical, as if something was pulling me forward. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my fingers still clutching the key, which now felt unbearably heavy in my hand. As I reached the stall, the lights flickered once more, and the figure in the mirror was gone. But I could still feel its presence, pressing down on me, suffocating, as if it were now watching from within the stall itself. I peered into the dark space, my heart pounding, and froze. There, scrawled across the inside of the stall door in fresh, wet red letters, were the words, "Help me escape." The letters seemed to glisten, as if they had been written moments before. I took a shaky step backward, only to hear the stall door creak open behind me. I whipped around, my pulse racing, and came face to face with nothing. Just the empty stall, its walls stained and crumbling. But as I stared into the darkness, a figure began to materialize, slowly forming from the shadows themselves. It was a woman, her face pale and sunken, her eyes hollow and dark. Her mouth was twisted in a grotesque grin, but her eyes were filled with an unending, soul-crushing despair. I stumbled backward, my hand reflexively clutching the key. The woman's gaze locked onto it, and her grin widened, revealing rows of rotting teeth. "That key," she rasped, her voice like nails scraping over glass. "It opens the door." I looked at the key in my hand, feeling its weight, the cold metal pressing into my skin. My instincts screamed at me to drop it, to leave this cursed place, but the woman's voice filled my mind, overwhelming my senses. "Open the door," she whispered, her tone pleading, desperate. "Let me out." The shadows around her began to writhe, tendrils of darkness twisting and curling, reaching out toward me like skeletal fingers. The lights flickered once more, and in that brief moment of darkness, her face changed, her grin twisting into a look of pure, ravenous hunger. The lights came back on, and she was gone. Only the key remained, heavy and cold in my hand, and the words on the stall door, "Help me escape." Part 5. The door to nowhere. I stumbled back, clutching the key with trembling fingers, every instinct screaming for me to leave. But the weight of her last words hung in the air, echoing in my mind like a haunting melody. "Help me escape." The bathroom was silent again, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something lurking, watching, waiting. My eyes fell to the key. The rust on it seemed darker now, almost like dried blood, and a strange warmth radiated from the metal. It felt alive in my hand, pulsing faintly, as if tethered to something beyond this place. Every fiber of my being wanted to drop it, but something else, a darker, more primal curiosity, kept me clutching it tightly. Then, as if responding to my touch, a faint scraping noise began, It came from the far end of the bathroom, beyond the stalls, where an old, graffiti-covered janitor's closet stood. I had barely noticed it before, tucked away in the corner, its paint peeling and its handle caked in grime. The scraping grew louder, rhythmic, like nails dragging across wood from the inside. I took a step forward, the sound pulling me in, almost hypnotically. The air around me grew thick, oppressive, the smell of decay intensifying until I could barely breathe without gagging. I reached the door and hesitated, heart hammering, every part of me filled with dread. This was a bad idea, a terrible idea, but it was too late to turn back. With a shaky hand, I slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first, grinding against the rusted metal, but then it clicked. The door creaked open, and a foul stench hit me like a wave, so powerful it made my eyes water. Inside, the darkness was absolute, thick and consuming. But as my eyes adjusted, I began to see shapes screwed, twisted figures scratched into the walls, symbols and words that made my skin crawl just to look at them. And then, at the very back of the closet, I saw it, a second door, almost hidden behind the shelves. Unlike the rest of the bathroom, this door looked newer, less decayed, but there was something wrong with it. It was painted black, its surface smooth and unblemished, as though it had been preserved protected. The doorknob was polished and gleaming, and in the dim light, I saw that it bore an inscription, "Enter freely and be bound." My throat went dry. I didn't know what that meant, but every instinct screamed at me that nothing good lay beyond that door. Yet something compelled me forward, a force stronger than fear or reason, urging me to turn the knob, to open the door. I reached out, hand shaking, and grasped the cold metal. The instant my fingers touched it, a shock ran through me, sharp and electric, but I couldn't pull away. I twisted the knob, and the door swung open silently, revealing another bathroom. But this one was different. The tiles were pristine, white and shining, the mirrors unblemished and reflecting brightly. It was an exact replica of the abandoned bathroom, yet untouched by time or decay, as if it had been waiting, preserved in some twisted mockery of reality. There were no broken sinks or graffiti, no cracked tiles or rotting stalls. Everything was clean, perfect, except for the silence. I stepped inside, feeling a strange disorientation, as if I had stepped into a photograph, a frozen moment in time. But the air was colder here, almost painfully so, and there was a faint humming sound, a low, unsteady vibration that I felt in my bones. As I moved deeper into the room, the door behind me clicked shut, and I turned to find it gone. The wall was seamless, smooth. Panic seized me, and I spun back around, looking for another exit. But all I saw were the same 5 stalls, their doors closed and immaculate. Then, one by one, the stall doors began to open. The first door creaked, revealing nothing but an empty stall. Then the second, and the third, each one swinging open to reveal the same pristine emptiness. My breath quickened as I watched the fourth door creak open, and I held my breath, waiting for the final stall. The fifth stall door remained closed. A heavy silence filled the room, so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. And then, from behind the door, I heard a voice, soft, pleading, the same voice that had whispered to me before. "Please, let me out." The voice was no longer twisted or sinister. It was fragile, desperate, filled with a sorrow, though deep it cut through my fear. Against every instinct, I found myself stepping forward, drawn by that haunting plea. My hand reached for the door, fingers brushing against the cool metal, and I felt a strange connection, a sense of shared pain. I pushed the door open slowly, bracing myself for whatever horror lay beyond, but the stall was empty. And then, before I could process what was happening, the door to the stall slammed shut, trapping me inside. The lights overhead flickered and dimmed, and the temperature dropped further, until I could see my breath clouding the air. I pounded on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The walls around me seemed to close in, and a sense of overwhelming dread washed over me, suffocating, consuming. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing, right next to my ear. I froze, heart hammering, as the soft, Slow breaths filled the stall, growing louder, closer, until I could feel the hot, rancid air on my skin. I closed my eyes, to terrify the look, and that's when I felt it cold, bony fingers brushing against my shoulder. I opened my eyes, and there, inches away from my face, was the woman from the mirror, her hollow eyes wide and gleaming with malice, her mouth twisted into a hungry, predatory grin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a hiss of satisfaction. "Now, you're bound," I screamed, but no sound escaped my throat. The darkness swallowed me, her hollow eyes the last thing I saw, fading into the endless black.